For this session, and this is the Public Interest Technology University Network Past, Present, and Future session. We have a handful of very passionate and dedicated folks in the room with us today, and then I know we have a number of folks who are joining us online right now. So we are going to start this conversation today actually with a presentation by Catherine Lusk, who unfortunately could not join us in person. Catherine Lusk co-leads the Boston University Initiative on Cities, a university-wide center that marshals the talents of Boston University in pursuit of more sustainable, just, and inclusive urban transformation. The initiative catalyzes interdisciplinary research with social, natural, and computational scientists, coordinates experiential learning, and develops civic partnerships. Catherine led the recent research on the state of the public interest technology field, which she will share with us today. And so again, we'll start with a presentation by Catherine Lusk.
Okay. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be joining all of you today. As Afua mentioned, my name is Catherine Lusk with the Boston University Initiative on Cities. I want to thank the entire team for managing all of the technical difficulties involved in making this event accessible to me. I apologize that I'm not able to be there in person. I was waylaid by COVID. Unfortunately, it is still with us. So I'm going to do two things in my remarks today. The first is I want to provide a little bit of context for Pitt UN and a little bit of the background and history of Pitt UN very, very briefly. I'm not part of the origin story. And then I want to take you through some research that I conducted with the team last summer to try to understand the state of public interest technology in higher ed. And I'll share some findings with you and then hopefully tee up a conversation for Sylvester and Afua to have with you in the room and engage folks online. So the first thing I wanted to say is just to make a few key points, that some of the points of difference about the Public Interest Technology University Network really starts, the sort of core premise of it and the history of it is really about engaging a diverse array of higher ed institutions, engaging leadership at those institutions to reimagine a socio-technical education that looks very different than what it has in the past. Some of the core elements of Pitt UN from its inception have really been focusing on that leadership engagement of presidents and provosts, focusing on diversifying the talent pipeline. So it's not just what we're teaching students, but who we're teaching. Combining a network with money. We often see lots of university networks, membership associations. I'm a part of a number of them in my seat at BU. And then we see sort of grant making, right? But these two things aren't necessarily often aligned. And what is really remarkable about Pitt UN is it's tried to put them both together to say, how do we build and foster a network in a community? And then how do we have some money at the table to grease the wheels and have those members really be investing in the kinds of programs that can create systemic change and real momentum to change and create this field of public interest technology. And then the last thing I'll say that has been really exciting for me and many others has been the fact that it's really not just one field. It's not just saying we're trying to change computer science or we're trying to change data science. What's been exciting about all the different partners at the table is that you see journalism programs, you see policy programs, you see data science and computer science, and you see law schools involved. And you see students and faculty across all of those different disciplines getting involved in public interest tech. So it's really about not just changing an individual discipline and an individual silo in higher ed, but actually trying to create connections across all those fields and trying to create change in a much broader and more systemic way. I'm going to share my screen with you because what I'd like to do now is take you through the findings of some of the research that we were a part of last summer. And give you a sense of what public interest tech looks like on the ground inside higher ed. And I'll say it's a moment in time. This is as of last summer, so the field continues to evolve. It's an exciting space to be in, but I want to share with you kind of what is happening inside the members who make up the Pitt UN network. So last summer, we set out to establish a state of the field for the 43 universities and colleges that comprise Pitt UN. There were 3 phases to the work: a member survey, a scan of all of the publicly available activities and programs, and then a piece of research that, stay tuned, it will be out very soon, really delving into a course scan and content analysis of actual classes happening in higher ed. I'm going to start at the end, which is this is sort of an end result of all of this research, was really trying to come up with one visual, one slide that encapsulates what does public interest tech actually look like today. The goal from the outset has really been to educate a generation who can critically assess the ethical, political, and societal implications of new technologies and design technologies in service of the public good. Well, what does that actually look like in practice? Well, it looks something like this. The broad contours of a public interest tech education starts with a diverse student pipeline so that we're attracting new groups, we're attracting women and non-binary students, we're attracting underrepresented minorities into the field. And they're being delivered and given a reimagined socio-technical education that combines core competencies and really in technical and data skills with a deep grounding in ethics, race and social justice, and community and user engaged design, all of which is grounded in real problems and real partners, and an education that is experiential and contextual. And the hope, the end goal, is that this new pipeline of students getting this new type of education are really focused when they emerge about in improving people's lives in just ways, that it's more than harm reduction and risk mitigation. Now, as I said, this is the end result. I'm showing you sort of the last slide first. This is the end result of this deep dive that we took into the state of the field within higher ed. And the consensus coming out of the field is that this is what is central to Pitt today. So let's dig a little deeper into the findings. What's actually been happening? So there's a ton of momentum and a lot of change already underway. About 85% of the members who currently make up Pitt UN have created new courses. About half have created new multidisciplinary steering committees, and half have also created new degrees, minors, certificates, or both. So they're actually literally changing the types of things students can major in or the types of qualifications and skills that they can gain. Where have things not been quite so successful? Well, it's really in these efforts to diversify the talent pipeline. So most folks that we surveyed actually gave their institutions relatively poor marks today in terms of their efforts to diversify the talent pipeline. So just 10% strongly agree their institutions are doing a good job attracting underrepresented minority students to STEM fields. 17% strongly agree they do a good job attracting women and non-binary students. Both of these suggest huge room for growth and frankly, new investment. What are some of the things that they are doing to try to attract underrepresented groups to public interest technology initiatives and programs? Well, most are focused on trying to diversify faculty and students, right? So they're saying we're doing targeted recruiting of diverse faculty, we're doing targeted recruiting of underrepresented students. The majority are also using real world projects, so that we find, even in our work at BU, we find that experiential learning attracts a different kind of student who is hungry for social impact. And that's exactly what Pitt UN members are saying, which when they provide students with real world projects and an opportunity for impact that's relevant to their lives, they're attracting a more diverse student body. What are they not doing? So if you go all the way to the bottom of the list, where has there not been as much activity? And I would point to a couple things. One is that only a third of members have a student transfer or pipeline partnership with community colleges. So community colleges are a much more diverse student population in this country than our four-year college programs. So that's a huge area of potential opportunity to attract all of that student talent in an intentional way into these fields. Second is only about a third are putting significant financial aid to attract underrepresented groups pursuing related degrees. Again, a huge area of opportunity. On the one hand, folks are saying, oh, we're doing targeted recruiting to underrepresented students. On the other hand, a minority are saying that we're putting significant financial aid in that area. We asked folks, what do they see as the core competencies? What is Pitt within their institution? Well, the majority of them said that they're, from a technical perspective, they are very focused on data science, first and foremost, and second, AI and machine learning. We also said, okay, what are your public interest priorities? And here we heard that the majority of them are focused on race and social justice. And 2/3 say that ethics and strong grounding in ethics are really core to the public interest focus of their programs. However, we don't see these priorities, particularly ethics, race and social justice, and community engagement, in the signals that universities are sending to higher ed about the kinds of skills that their students are acquiring. So we found over 400 related graduate and undergraduate degrees and credentials across 43 members as of last summer. However, at the time, no degrees reference race, justice, or community engagement in the name of the degree. One socio-technical degree at Nazareth referenced ethics, and we found one master's in public interest technology at Arizona State University, which was the only, at the time, the only Pitt degree or credential. In the credentials, I'll call those sort of certificates, concentrations, the other kinds of things students can put on their resume to signal areas where they have a strong skill base. In those areas, race, justice, and community engagement were referenced just once each in credential offerings, meaning in 43 institutions and 400 programs, I found 3 instances. So this suggests a huge area of opportunity, not only to be changing curriculum, but to be signaling to students and to employers, here's the types of skills our students are walking away with. As I mentioned it, this is an area that I love because our students love it. It's an area that brought me into public service, is experiential learning. So really giving students the opportunity to do hands-on learning with government partners, industry partners, community organizations. We found 120 relevant experiential learning programs in this public interest tech space. And that doesn't even include internship programs. So the vast majority of members in Pitt UN have their students working with real world data, and many of them have internships with external organizations. And most of them are also focused on these client source projects that they gather from the outside world, build partnerships, and embed them into the courses. And I want to give a shout out to student leadership. We found extraordinary evidence of student leadership and real bottoms up interest. 120 student clubs. So these are students self-organizing and coming together to work on public interest technology initiatives. And some of them are even leading their own internship programs and experiential learning programs for their peers. And if you really believe in the nothing about us without us ethos, then this suggests a major opportunity to engage even more students in leadership in the Pitt space. Because universities are known for their silos, we had to ask about them. And we really see in Pitt, it's going to be critical for higher ed institutions to continue to work on breaking down academic and disciplinary silos and better enabling interdisciplinary teaching. So 40% of the folks we surveyed cited a lack of faculty with dual expertise. What does that mean? So it's like a data science expert who also has ethics training, or a journalism professor who also has training in machine learning. That area, sort of that lack of dual training, is for 40% of members a barrier to growth of Pitt, where those kinds of skills embodied in one person or in one class are really critical. But the challenge is even greater. I think it was about 70% of minority serving institutions actually cited this as a key challenge. And so that suggests that interdisciplinary teaching, bringing those 2 skills into the classroom and into degree programs, is really going to be critical. But here, just 17% of members say that their institutions do a good job enabling interdisciplinary teaching. As much as they say they're encouraged to be innovative, there aren't enough supports yet to bring different skills or faculty with dual skills into the classroom. Okay, I want to recap with a few opportunities for the future, because I don't get to be part of the rest of the conversation for today. So I'm going to tee up a few. The first, as I shared, is really focusing on diversifying the student talent pipeline. Now, what does that mean? That means much more concerted efforts to direct financial aid dollars to underrepresented groups. That means women and non-binary students who are still grossly underrepresented in technical fields and in degree programs. And it means much more targeted dollars to underrepresented minority students who are still not sufficiently represented in these degree programs. But it also means investing in culture change and anti-bias initiatives within higher ed. It's one thing to attract the students. It's another thing to create an environment where they feel supported, where curriculum and expertise is reflected from their own community, where their faculty reflect and are drawn from their own community. So that means diversifying curriculum, that means diversifying faculty, that means anti-bias training, that means an investment in cohorts. There's a whole range of things that universities are deploying incredibly effectively, but not enough of them are doing enough of those things. Second, there's an opportunity to invest in pedagogy. So as I mentioned, there is much greater need within public interest tech, which is this marriage of socio and technical fields, for co-teaching models as well as for curricular diffusion. What does that mean? That means having ethics integrated into computer science training. It means having machine learning integrated into journalism education. And it takes people who have those skills, and it takes multidisciplinary syllabi and real world projects to realize that for students. Third, signaling and valuing skills in race, ethics, and justice in degrees. That means looking at naming conventions, which is the simplest sense, looking at naming conventions to say, are we signaling to employers, are we signaling to students that these aren't just skills that are sort of embedded deep down, on the fourth class of a course over the course of the semester, but these are things that we're actually elevating up and saying these are critical skills that our students are walking away from, and signaling their importance to employers. And then finally, and I know Sylvester will talk about this a little bit, really thinking about current and future professionals. So how is Pitt UN fostering a community not only among current students, but how are we turning those students into lifelong learners? How are we investing in their managers and their workplaces so that we're changing the culture of the institutions that they're actually going to work in, whether that's in the private sector or government roles or nonprofit and advocacy organizations? I have one last slide, which I want to say, what are the risks that Pitt UN may run into in the future? The first one is one that anyone in higher ed knows well, which is academic silos. It is very hard to break down academic silos. All of our publications, our accreditation, tenure cases, everything really rewards siloization. And yet Pitt UN is saying we have to break down silos because we have to bring these fields together, and we have to draw on expertise and skills and perspective and lived experience from a whole range of different disciplines. But those academic silos stand in the way and will continue to be a barrier that higher ed institutions have to tackle head on. The second one is the potential for politics to intervene. I have the privilege of being at a private institution in a very liberal state that is also not dependent on state funding. Now, if you are an academic institution that is in a conservative state that is reliant to whatever degree, even if it's a small proportion, of state level funding, and you're signaling that race and social justice are key priorities, you may run into political interference. I think this is something that I'm not going to speak to as an expert, but it is certainly something that we're hearing from higher ed institutions across the country, that conservative state legislatures, as much as they may want to invest in STEM fields, may say, but we actually don't want to be investing in race and social justice and programs to break down systemic racism. This is related to the third point, which is funding disparities. So again, privilege being at a private higher ed institution where we have a wealth of resources to equip people like me and all of our faculty in pursuing federal grant dollars, foundation dollars, and we also are drawing on a healthy endowment. There are huge funding disparities when you're building a network of heterogeneous academic institutions that include both those private R1 universities and state colleges, community colleges, minority serving institutions. You find incredible disparity in the resources available to all of those different members. So this is something for Pitt and all of its funders to think about in the future, is how do you actually overcome some of those funding disparities so that more opportunity is available, particularly to members that have historically not seen the same level of federal and foundation dollars historically. Fourth, employer culture. I alluded to this a little bit, but if we're educating this incredible array of students and a diverse student pipeline, and they're running into employer culture that is reluctant to change, that does not support and embrace diversity, that does not support and embrace women, and elevate them into positions of authority, then the field and the desired impact of the field will run into that wall of reality. So it's an opportunity for Pitt UN to really think about how do we change employer culture at scale, so that when we're graduating these students who are, let's admit it, the lowest people on the totem pole, they're in an environment where they can create positive cultural change and have real meaningful societal impact. And last thing, status quo bias, right? Whatever field, wherever you sit, whether you're in private sector, whether you're in government, whether you're in higher ed, the status quo is always the easy way to go. And so how do we, as a community of students and scholars and leaders and funders, actually rail against status quo bias and try to create real and meaningful change? This is, there's a lot more in the report. This is the link to it. If anyone wants to take a photo and you want to go find it, it's called the Public Interest Technology University Network, Understanding the State of the Field. There's a wealth of resources in there. If you are not part of Pitt UN, if you are thinking about changing your curriculum, if you want to create a faculty and student training program to help people understand systemic racism, all of these resources are actually packed up in the report. And I thank you all again for being part of the conversation today. I'm so sorry I cannot be with you.
Catherine, for providing those framing remarks for our conversation today. And so again, we're here to talk about the past, present, and future of the Public Interest Technology University Network. We'll start by, I will introduce myself and I'll let Sylvester introduce himself, and then we'll go ahead and dive in. But I want to let everyone know, whether you're in the room here or watching online, that if you have questions, you can go to bit.ly/whatispittunqa. It's capital W from what, capital I from is, and capital Pitt UNQA to put in your questions, and we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. So again, please go to bit.ly/whatispittunqa to enter your questions. My name is Afua Bruce. I'm the principal of A&B Advisory Group, and I have been working with Pitt UN for a long time. I'm a former director of New America's Pitt program, and while I was director of Pitt is when we launched the Pitt UN, and so I've been able to see it grow over the years, and I'm now consulting with Pitt UN, and so it's wonderful just to see the growth, both in number of universities, in scope and breadth and diversity, and on a number of different dimensions. And so I'm really excited to have this conversation with Sylvester today, so I'll go ahead and let you introduce yourself.
Thanks very much. I'm Sylvester Johnson. I am at Virginia Tech, where I serve as Assistant Vice Provost for the Humanities, and I direct our Center for Humanities and also Executive Director of Tech for Humanity Initiative, which is a university-wide effort to build out and operationalize comprehensive approaches to technology to achieve more equitable outcomes that is very resonant with the public interest technology aims and goals. So we're delighted to be part of the consortium, and Pitt UN has been a really important way for us to be able to execute that initiative across our university and to begin to address some of the humanistic challenges that we have with technologies, as we are a comprehensive university that is best known for our technology, but that has a comprehensive mission. So very delighted to be here.
Great, thank you. So once upon a time in Public Interest Technology University network history, New America had a Pitt program. We had a number of fellows working on a number of different issues with nonprofit organizations, with government institutions, and with academic institutions. And so we convened a number of academics with the support of the Ford Foundation to define what is public interest technology. What do we want to be the official definition of public interest technology? What can it look like, especially in the academic context, because that is a significant lever for change. And what does PIT look like as a field, as a discipline, in being able to find jobs and in being able to train people. And so with that, we launched the University Network with a handful of universities then, but still representative of a number of different types of universities. We had HBCU, we had a number of PWIs, we had small institutions, we had large institutions as well. And over the past 4 years, the network has continued to grow. There are many more institutions now. There's a number of different projects. I believe the report Catherine referenced mentioned that there are more than 1,300 related programs, initiatives, and resources across the 43 member institutions of the Pitt UN now. And so that's sort of how we got to where we are today. But one piece that's always been integral to the Public Interest Technology University Network is this idea of it being multidisciplinary in nature, this idea of needing to bring together many different disciplines, this idea of needing to cross identities and cross issues. And so, Sylvester, I'm wondering if you can talk to us a little bit about just intersectional transformation. What does that mean? What does that look like on campuses, and what's its relevance to the work?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really central to the work of Pitt UN to be able to bring together people who are working certainly in different areas of expertise and different disciplines, but also different sectors of our world. So one of the important things about Pitt UN is really creating the opportunity and heightening the urgency for us to have comprehensive approaches and the kind of talent that we cultivate. So I'll say a couple of points as a way of answering that question. We have begun to realize, most of us who are at least partially paying attention realize globally that the most difficult challenges, the most difficult problems that we have to solve with technology are actually at the human frontier of technology. And there are technical things that we have to solve. We're really good at solving technical problems. We have yet to break through to real solutions to some of the societal challenges that we have with technology. You can pick anything from algorithmic bias to some of the way that innovation is driving greater disparities in wealth inequality, to some of the urgency around innovations in biomedicine. Just kind of pick your spot and then look at how it's challenging our society. And that's the hard stuff that we actually are not good at all at solving yet. The other thing is that we have been telling the wrong story as a society about what technology is. We have, for at least since Sputnik, have equated it with sin. We said that it's technical things. And what we're realizing now, because we are having a public conflicts, and if you look at what happens on Capitol Hill around technology, for example, the debates that are going on, the fights are over the human side. And what that tells us is that we have to have an intersectional, comprehensive way of nurturing new talent for the creation, for the development, for the regulation of even consumption of technology. And so Pitt UN's focus on not a particular discipline, but on the different areas of knowledge and expertise across universities is the right method at the right time. Pitt UN is actually one of the most essential forces that is helping us to get our story right about what technology actually is. It certainly includes technical things, but as our hardest problems keep showing us over and over again, it is also a comprehensive issue. And technology is especially a human issue. The highest stakes that are of interest and the highest cost factors are around people in our society and in our world, and even the non-human world, in our environment. So because the consortium is enabling people across different disciplines, from humanities to business to engineering to math to the creative arts, to bring to bear on those challenges their insights, their skills, their knowledge sets, then we're able to start to address technology's challenges and to realize its positive opportunities for what it is, and that's a comprehensive set of challenges and problems. The other element or dimension that's important for public interest technology And the consortium is the recognition that we have to engage not only academics, but also practitioners, right? They're people who are, they've gone to school at some point, but right now in their lives, they're out in private industry, or maybe they're working in government. They're somewhere in their careers, and they're doing work that is absolutely integral and critical to how technology systems and innovations get created, how they get deployed, how they are assessed at the level of policy and regulatory concerns, and how they're consumed, and how they affect local communities. So that comprehensive lens, not just inside of academic institutions, but also across our world, across our society, has been very integral. And so kudos to you and your team, for having the foresight to engage that, not just as, for the University Networking Consortium, not just as transdisciplinary within academic institutions, but actually transsector in terms of our society. So those are important, and I could give a couple of examples of how that's getting realized in the consortium and even at our own institution at Virginia Tech. But within the consortium, we have working groups, certainly that are constituted by people from multiple disciplines who are talking to one another, who are strategizing together, who are developing initiatives, and discovering the opportunities for collaborations. That's been one of the incredible rewards of that consortium. And so that means that within a given university or program, as Catherine was just showing with some of the examples that she gave, you have faculties across multiple departments who can work together to develop curriculum. And that can happen in many ways. It could be they develop a syllabus or they co-teach together, or it could be I'm one person in my department, I'm teaching a course, but I'm going to invite people into this class, maybe they're guest speakers, who are in different disciplines, who are working together. We see new programs that are reaching across a particular discipline in order to get to the challenges of technologies as they actually operate. And that is, they don't come in a box.
Absolutely, and I just wanted to pick up on something you mentioned. I mean, you made a lot of great points that I want to come back to, but especially just to pick up on this last piece about the importance of curriculum, the importance about engaging people where they are now, both in academia and outside of academia, and I know, and with the working groups that the network has. And I know you led a working group, you led the summer series that we had that really spoke to the curriculum development piece and engaging professionals. And so can you talk to us a little bit about that summer series?
Absolutely. Yeah, summer 2022 was the summer speaker series that was a Public Interest Technology University Network event. And that was something that was created by the working group that was dealing with careers, career pipelines, and career placement. And the focus was on developing a set of speakers who would come in together to provide a really friendly, gentle introduction to what public interest technology actually is. And that was very successful. We had a series of speakers who offered multiple workshops that were focused on topics, starting with an introduction to public interest technology that included examples of people with public interest tech careers who were providing from their own experience examples of what that meant, to speaker topics that were focusing on very particular contexts, such as law and regulatory issues, or who were looking at things like human-centered design or smart cities and transportation networks. And so by having that summer speaker series with multiple topics, we invited the public to sign up for the series. We offered a micro-credential for those who completed at least a minimum number of those topics in the speaker series. And we had hundreds of people who actually registered for that, and around 200 people who actually got the credential. There was terrific participation in it. It drew from populations who were students, some who were practitioners, others who were just curious about what this topic was and may or may not have been related to their academic aspirations or to their professional work, but most of them were either students who were in colleges and universities in some area and discipline getting introduced to this, or they were practitioners who were able to engage with this topic and have it enhance their own participation in their careers. So that was very successful, and it provided us with a really important lesson, and that was as we started to envision that summer speaker series, we thought about it more strictly in terms of existing students at our own institutions. But by the time we launched it and put it together and started to see the registrations for it, we realized that this was actually a terrific way of providing fluency in the questions, right? We're not trying to make people experts in public interest tech with one speaker series. We're trying to help them to understand why this is important, what it can mean in their own context to engage with public interest tech as students, as practitioners, as people who have a general civic oriented interest in this. And the success of it was having something that could translate really well for a broad audience.
I think that last point about making sure that PIT can translate for a broad audience is really important, especially when we think about the evolution of the PIT UN, the growth of the public interest tech field overall, that ability to speak to a broad audience is really important. And so we've talked about some of the great things about PIT, the great things about PIT UN, some of the exciting initiatives that are going on. But I know it's not all roses. There are a number of challenges that PIT UN faces now, even as it continues to grow and to do well. We heard Catherine talk about the discrepancy in funding that's available, for example, between institutions, even within institutions, between different academic departments, different multidisciplinary programs and the like. Catherine also mentioned the challenge about the changing political climate and how that can affect what people are allowed to pursue, are allowed to name, are allowed to focus on, or not. I think we also see a lot of challenges in institutionalizing a lot of the initiatives that have happened over the past couple of years within PIT UN. How do we make sure that we transition some of these programs that have started, some of these experiential learning courses that have started, from one-off programs that were funded by a PIT UN grant or some other temporary granting source, and make them more permanent? So Sylvester, can you talk to me a little bit about some of the challenges you see with the PIT UN?
Absolutely. I think, yeah, those are, thanks for summarizing some of the terrific points that Catherine was raising. So to echo one of those points, there are some, when it comes to curriculum development, so we want to create classes that are engaging with these issues and topics for students to be able to make part of their learning. There are structural issues. I'll give a couple examples with the way universities typically handle revenue generation. So universities and colleges have to have revenue, have to have some way of generating an ability to pay for expenses and to pay your employees. So we charge tuition. We charge students to take classes. And typically that's divided up into, here's a college within a university. It could be the College of Business or the College of Arts and Sciences. And their departments get revenue in that department as they enroll students in their classes. And so if I'm, just an example, if I'm a history professor or an English professor, or department rather, and someone in the science department wants to have a course that reaches across history and science and offer that to students so they can have a historical understanding of technology. If that's offered in the science department, I might think in the history department, well, they're taking away some potential revenue from my department, right? That's a structural issue, and it might make us resistant to collaborate. And then on the other side, if you take someone, there's a lot of attention to equipping students who are science majors with the kinds of analytical, intellectual, knowledge-based, school-based tools that they need in order to get to these public interest tech outcomes. So if you're typically an engineering student, there's no room in your curriculum to add an extra course or two that deals with those issues. So that's a structural change, structural challenge. And so we have to get better at modifying those structures so that all the goodwill that exists to do better and to create better talent for civic-minded public interest technology is not hamstrung by those traditional structures. Another challenge is getting the public interest technology commitment operationally to really expand and to take off and grow in private industry in the way that it has begun to flourish in our colleges and universities. So the history of Pitt and the consortium is relatively short. There's been, I mean, despite all these challenges, there are actually really profound, terrific outcomes that have already been established. And that's everything from new research that's happening and grant activity and teaching. But how do we get that into private industry? And so that is a lot harder. There are other things, other concerns. Profitability, you know, if you're a publicly traded company, you have to report on those earnings, and your shareholders usually are not very interested in public interest. If you are a for-profit company, you could actually get sued by your shareholders for not optimizing your company's revenue because maybe you try to privilege some public interest or public benefits. So even if you wanted to do good, you could actually get sued by your shareholders. So those are some challenges that we're going to have to face as we move this further into the future.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think the private sector piece, as you mentioned, is definitely the next big area to tackle. We've seen public interest tech be adopted at various levels within government agencies. We're seeing some slow adoption, I think, in the nonprofit space. Certainly in the academic space, we're seeing a lot of adoption of public interest tech concepts, but certainly how do we make public interest tech work in the private sector, I think, is the next big challenge. There's some interesting research, I think, going on out of Harvard's Technology and Public Purpose program, which wrote a couple of papers on this last year, and Cornell Tech has done some interesting research as well that's shown examples of when private sector companies, by implementing public interest tech ideas, have actually increased some of their profitability by then developing features that are more widely usable and increase engagement. So I think there's some inroads, but certainly that's an area we really need to work on next. Another challenge and question that I hear often from people, whether they are students or whether they are professionals, is how do I get started in public interest tech? I've heard the pitch, I'm really interested, it sounds like a great idea, but what do I do next? How do I get started there? So what advice would you have for someone who is interested in becoming a public interest technologist and becoming a practicing public interest technologist? What are the first steps you would recommend to them?
Well, definitely a really great question. So this, from the experience of our summer speaker series, engage with public interest technology programming. And of course, this consortium is, I think it's fair to say, is the most important thing happening in the academic space for public interest tech. So if you're out there in private industry and you're interested in this, look for ways to engage. That doesn't have to be, oh, I have to go back and take a course. No, it could be something that was something like a conference that you can attend that's engaging with these questions. There are many opportunities to do that. You mentioned the new studies and publications and white papers that are coming out that are not only assessing the opportunity space for advancing public interest, but are trying to highlight pathways to actually operationalize some of those things. And so that's low-hanging fruit. If you can Zoom into a conference, you often now don't even have to physically go, and maybe you can get a piece of a panel that is relevant to your area in private industry. Maybe you're working in the AI space or the biomedical space or in financial technology. And beyond that, I think it's important, particularly for people who have higher level positions in private industry, if they are attuned to these issues and they care about them, to begin to activate the ways that engaging with public interest tech can allow you to both do good and do well as a company. And so you gave an example of this, of how one example is ESG, so the part of investing that looks at companies that are operating in concrete ways to be socially responsible are actually benefiting from increased investment in those companies. And there are many investors who want the world to be a better place. They not only want a positive return on their capital, but they want a world that they and their children and their grandchildren can actually live in and inhabit. And so if you are a higher level person in private industry and you want to get engaged, one way to get engaged is not just, oh, do I have to go to a workshop? Do I have to expand my knowledge base? It is, how can I structure the driving forces in my company as a corporate leader to make PIT translate into the interest of that company? There is increasing regulatory pressure that is coming down from many different areas, but certainly the federal government. We have a blueprint for AI ethics that's just come out of the White House, for example, that is setting out these standards that not only private companies, but the federal agencies, that are all of our entities, including our colleges and universities, are gonna have to recognize and figure out how to meet in order to move forward. Many companies can understand something like, if we don't want to get sued for harm or bias, we have to make sure that what we're designing doesn't create that harm or bias. That's a top line and bottom line incentive, right? And so I think for higher level people in private industry, those are ways that they can get involved.
Absolutely. I think yes to all of that. I think the regulatory pressure is another lever that I hope we will see more of, see used more often in the future. I think just building on what you said, thinking about academics as well, as they might look to be more involved in public interest tech, really taking a critical eye towards their curriculum, seeing how their curriculum supports or doesn't support public interest tech ideas, and then also participating perhaps in some PIT UN events and more to learn what other academics are doing. And before I go to questions that perhaps people have submitted, again at bit.ly/whatispitUNQA, I'll ask you one final question, which is, what do you think the results of the work we're doing now through the PIT UN looks like 10 years from now? So as the field grows, what will some of the experiential learning programs and opportunities that we are investing in now, what will it look like 10 years from now?
This is great because, anyone can be an expert on the future because it hasn't happened yet. And maybe 10 years from now, you won't remember exactly.
My favorite kind of expert.
But I do think that if we think about trajectories, right, we can already see more collaboration between colleges and universities and private industry in the ways that students are having opportunities to learn. And that could be everything from someone for private industry, maybe they come in as a guest speaker in a class, to actually having a course that includes, as the faculty, people who are from private industry and people who are academically trained and working at that institution. So to have a project-based learning for the students, where students are not only reading about problems, but they're actually trying to develop that. So I think we're gonna see more of it. And I think that 10 years from now, it will be much more integral and normative for universities and colleges to enroll students in courses where they're either moving back and forth between industry or industry and academics or in the classroom with those students. I think another area that I think can emerge partly because of the tailwinds, the impetus, the creative support that the PIT UN is providing, is that beyond thinking about the curricular development and the research and the public engagement as speaking, workshops, information, et cetera, that we begin to be more creative and have more of a social justice equity focus on something else that colleges and universities do, and that is they spin off companies. So how can we get into that space so that some of those new companies that are emerging are being founded with this PIT UN mission? I think that can emerge in a very profound way, and I think, can we do that in a decade? Yes.
Thank you so much. And so we had, looks like some issues with some of the live stream for a portion of our talk. And so just in closing and I'm checking questions here. I'm not just texting, by the way, with my phone. But just want to ask in closing and tie it back actually to something you said in the response to the first question, Sylvester, which is about the human factor and how it all comes back to people and to communities. So how do you think that Pitt UN can do a better job of really engaging with communities and centering communities in the work that it takes on?
That's a great question. I think that the consortium, well, I'll say two things. One, colleges and universities right now, with some important exceptions, because there are very important exceptions to what I'm about to say, don't do a great job. We don't do a good job of engaging with the people who actually live right around in the neighborhoods where our universities are located. And so if the question is about how can Pitt UN do that, and that's certainly got to mean, well, what needs to change about the way our colleges and universities operate? Sometimes that's called the town-gown divide, in order to engage more with local organizations. And that has to be everything from stop making it so hard for people to park on campus just to come to an event, to we have an opportunity that the pandemic has taught us, right, that this is an example of. You can use remote technologies, and most of us have been through our Zoom boot camp or Teams boot camp or something like that, WebEx boot camp, because of the pandemic. We now know how to tune into something. Even if we haven't always learned how to mute and unmute ourselves, but you can tune into something. And so we can leverage that to get more engagement, to get out our program with people who live in and around so they don't have to drive to the campus. You know, they can participate with us. That's not a replacement for in-person, but it's just a low-hanging fruit way of getting more engagement. And I think that as we also engage more with civil liberties institutions, organizations who by their mission are concerned with institutions and practices of democratic outcomes, of democracies. As we see the opportunity and the need to engage more with institutions that are concerned with things like governance, that we will need to make a shift from only foregrounding the need for our universities to think about who the employers are going to be and building relationships with those folks, to thinking about, okay, we've done well with that, right? And we need that. We need to do that. Now, how do we build out that muscle for creating those internship opportunities or the engagement opportunities with organizations who, again, by their mission, and you can think of them, who by their mission are supposed to advance democratic outcomes and social justice. We haven't done that as well, and we don't usually think about those places as places where our students should be getting jobs. But if we're actually gonna move public interest forward, we have got to make that part of how we're thinking about strategic relationships and outreach. And I think if our colleges and universities move in that direction, then the consortium can move in that direction. And then we will have more civic engagement, and we will have more locally and regional domains of collaborative building and operating in order to get to these better outcomes that we need.
Absolutely. I'm still stuck on the recommendation, which I hope everyone listening takes forward, of stop making it so hard to park on campus when you're trying to attend an event. The number of times I've been late because of parking. But this isn't about me. It is about the Pitt UN. And so I think also to your point about universities and colleges needing to do a better job with working with their communities in which they're often embedded, I actually think it's hopeful to think of how Pitt could be a framework to really push universities and colleges back to what in many cases is part of their original mission, was to serve and to benefit their local communities. So with that, many thanks to Catherine Lusk, who joined us at the start with her presentation, to you, Sylvester Johnson, for joining us today. And thank you for this talk that we had on the Public Interest Technology University Network, past, present, and future.
And thanks for inviting me.
Oh, sorry. I'm being told there might be 2 more questions to be asked. There have been. Sorry, the last time I checked, I'd gotten through all the questions. And so that was a quick wrap up and part 2 of the questions. So one is actually around Supreme Court decisions. So I am going to direct this directly at you and bypass me. What impact will a Supreme Court decision around affirmative action have on efforts to build a diverse talent pipeline?
And how much time do we have?
And again, we'll ask you to be an expert in the future.
So I think it's safe to say that if the Supreme Court makes a ruling that undermines the ability of our institutions to actually put into practice in a deliberate way more equitable outcomes, more equitable ways of creating access to participation and learning, to serve everyone and not just mostly a particular race or a particular economic class. If they make that harder, it will, of course, be a very, very harmful development that will, it will, I don't want to say it'll make it impossible for us to do our work. It won't make it impossible. It will become a lot harder. And if I could say that with a little bit of strategy to it, I think it underscores the importance of the work that our institutions must continue to do to make the issues of equity and diversity and understanding how inequality actually functions systemically and structurally, to keep that as part of how we're educating people, so that as they move into these different areas, whether that is a career in law, maybe they get appointed to a court, that they're actually able to bring to that work a fact-based, analytically astute understanding of how these systems and histories and ongoing structures of inequality work and what it will actually require to fix them.
I think that's a great way to phrase it, and I think your point about how the work can continue, even though it would be more difficult, is really important. I think a lot of strong foundations have been laid over the years. Pitt UN, public interest technology, while a relatively new term, is not necessarily a completely new idea. I think different iterations have happened in the past, and so we have a lot of lessons to go off of for what it means to continue to prioritize or to focus on issues of diversity and justice, even as political climates and, in some cases, Supreme Court decisions change over time. So the next question that is here, and I think what is the final question, at least as of this point, that's here is, what might a new era of partnership between R1s and community colleges or other schools that attract a much more diverse student population look like? I am so excited to hear your thoughts on this.
This is a great question because it to your point of that question, yes, even the most successful efforts that have been made in Research 1 universities and even R2s, which are largely predominantly white institutions, even the most laudable and impressive gains are pale in comparison to what is just the norm at our community colleges. Because of what is often an open admissions policy or very low barriers to getting in and to paying for the cost of education, they are so far ahead when it comes to the diversity. And so any serious thoughts that any R1s might have about being engaged and increasing the inclusiveness of the pipelines in talent and the access to talent, any serious conversation about that has to have some way of engaging with community colleges. So that needs to be worked out on a case-by-case basis, but clearly some of that can be the removing the barriers for those students who do an associate's degree at a community college to move right into a four-year university, for example. And there have been multiple examples of R1s that have used that to really positive ends in order to increase their diversity. But there has to be some kind of strategic partnership. And I think that If you were to start from scratch today and just invent, so it's 2022, and you say, okay, we're going to invent the university. We're going to act like it never existed, and we're just going to create it today. How would we do it? And there are any number of ways to do that. There's one that has actually happened, and it's Station One, and it's not really quite a university. It was founded by Christine Ortiz, who has been very successful in creating an institution that is able to get access to higher ed by having a summer semester for students who are almost entirely coming from underrepresented populations. I mean, these are students from backgrounds that are typically so severely underrepresented in our R1s. And she's not trying to replace the four-year university, but she has done that institution, Station One, has done an amazing job of making it possible for students who are usually not going to be significantly represented in these R1s to actually do a summer semester with university faculty and practitioners. So this is a model for the future that we've been talking about. She's already doing it. That they're doing research. They're working with state-of-the-art. They're getting exposed to very exciting methods, and it is embodying Pitt. You know, they're studying STEM projects, and it's infused with social science and humanities in order to get those civic-minded social justice outcomes. And so, you know, if you could think about scaling that out, if you were just going to redo this thing, you'd certainly want to remove the barriers that keep giving us the results of these highly skewed admissions that don't match the actual population of our society and our world. To put that more bluntly, that persons of color are actually not numerical minorities in our world. They're numerical majorities. But we've because of all kinds of histories of inequality, and what we have is a result of a structure. So I think that what that says is we need to change how we let people into the system. And I think we can take a lesson from what community colleges have already done. And I think that we need more varieties of this thing that we called higher ed. I think the future will create opportunities for things that look different. I think, as I said, I've named Station One as an example. I was able to speak with their founder a few weeks ago to learn about some of the things that they're doing. I think it's a highly instructive example because it blends the successes that community colleges have had with being more admissive and less rejective, right? It blends that with the research experience and the engagement with people in private industry and research-based faculty that you usually see in the R1s.
Absolutely. I think the examples that you shared of what's going on today is really exciting. I think the work that you shared is exciting. I think also of what Miami-Dade continues to do, and its building of Miami-Dade, which of course is a Pitt UN member as well, and its building of strategic relationships and strategic partnerships with other institutions is really important. So to your point, the future is happening now. The future is now in some of these places, and it's important for us to expand that and give more people access and to change that work. And so with that, I think I'm getting a nod that I have indeed now asked all the questions, so thank you for hanging with us a little longer. Again, my name is Afua Bruce. Thank you to Catherine Lusk, who joined us virtually, and to Sylvester Johnson for this session. And with that, we'll free you to go to the next session. So thank you so much. And those of you attending online, the next virtual session starts at the time that is on the schedule that I don't remember right now, but have a good afternoon.